Amendment 19, Lord Bird. I don't think Lord Bird is here, so Baroness Bennett of Manor Castle.
My Lords, I rise at the request of the Noble Lord, Lord Bird, to move Amendment 19. The Noble Lord wishes me to send his sincere apologies that he's unable to be here today. I shall do my best to be a substitute, although I'm not quite sure that my acting skills are quite up to that, but I shall do my best. This amendment is very simple. It adds an extra principle to the list of principles to be considered, that policies and decisions should take into account the interests of the members of future generations. And the fact is, of course, we know that the climate emergency and the nature crisis are already here, but that even more severe impacts are waiting in the wings for future generations. We're seeing floods and forest fires, and these impacts are going to grow in the coming decades. Future generations are desperate for us to do something now, so they get a chance for a decent life. In this chamber, we've all benefited from the vision, the bravery and the foresight of past generations, whether that's a parent or grandparent who fought in a number of the 20th century wars, or those who founded the NHS or decriminalised homosexuality. And indeed, noble lords may remember the Noble Lord, Lord Bird, speaking very powerfully in his own Future Generations Bill at greater length on those issues. So we are in a unique position now to change the course of history for our children, our grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and those not yet born. Make their lives better, safer, more secure, more stable, and more prosperous. This amendment sets out that as a principle of government action. But we need to acknowledge that responsibility, and we also need to listen to the young people who are saying, what are you doing to our future now? We have to have a commitment to long-term thinking and interrogating the consequences of our policy decisions, to look for better solutions for today's problems that will leave the future better off. We all know, and there's many members of your Lordship's House who as former members of government within these walls have recognised their decisions in the past have had unintended consequences. We have to stop trying to solve the problems that we've created. So that's the introduction to the bill. To the amendment. I just wish to add one personal comment here in terms of Amendment 19. We do have a huge problem in terms of short-term thinking. It's the nature of our political system. Other political systems with different electoral arrangements, modern functional constitutions, produce more long-term thinking, different kinds of approaches. It's beyond the scope of today to get into tackling that, but we can, by writing this principle of considering future generations into the bill, do something to change the nature of our decision-making. I turn now briefly to the Amendment 20 in the name of the Noble Lady Baroness Parmenter, also signed by the Noble Lady Baroness Hayman of Ulloch and the Noble Lord Lord Krebs and myself. And I just want to pick up a few points from the same amendment that was moved in committee. The Noble Lady Baroness Parmenter asked the question then, and I really want to reinforce this question because we didn't get an answer to it in committee. The Noble Lady pointed out that there is in the Climate Change Act the requirement to have due regard for the military. What is different about this? We've been discussing again and again in this debate the way in which biodiversity and climate are interrelated. If it applies to climate, how can it not possibly apply for the military and Treasury in terms of this Act as well? I also wish to, in addressing the point of ensuring that the Treasury is covered by these provisions, note that the economy is a complete subset of the environment. And I note that there is currently a petition calling for the government to set up a wellbeing economy for the Treasury to be decided to make its decisions on the basis of the well-being of people and planet, which has approaching 60,000 signatures. Now, in the committee debate, I referred to the integrated review, which acknowledges that the climate emergency is at the centre of security policy. It indeed says that climate change and biodiversity loss are our #1 international priority. So how then can we not be seeing the environmental principles covering all of our security activities? And the Noble Lord the Minister, in the debate in committee, suggested that excluding these two paragraphs would restrict our response to urgent threats. The application would not be proportionate. But I would point the Noble Lord the Minister to 17.2, the clause 17.2 in this bill, which says the policy statement of environmental principles should be interpreted and proportionately applied by ministers when making policy. The proportionality is already there in every aspect of the application of environmental principles. And in responding to questions about Treasury being covered, the Noble Lord the Minister said in committee, well, we have to have maximum flexibility for the nation's finances. Well, we can see where that got us, my lords. We've seen successive governments of a number of different hues who've continued freezing the fuel duty escalator, which up to 2019 had cost the government cumulatively £8 billion. And of course, very difficult to measure, but certainly significant environmental damage, as the cost of public transport has kept going up, and people have found themselves priced back into their cars. And as the Overseas Development Institute noted in November 2020, the UK was last on the list of 11 OECD countries in terms of the levels of fossil fuel subsidies coming from the Treasury going to the industries that are trashing our planet, and indeed on transparency. So, my lords, environmental principles, the key really is in the word principles. Principles should apply across the board to government, with the already existing allowance for due flexibility, particularly in case of emergency.